Welcome to Young Money. I'm Nozipho Mbanjwa. What a fantastic way to start off the new year. We're in the entrepreneurial heartbeat of the Johannesburg jungle. Yes, we're in the CBD and we're about to meet up with two really exciting entrepreneurs. One of them is Bumi Liam. She is the CEO of Hesed Consulting, and we're going to be finding out how she is unlocking the very best operational excellence for her clients. And then we get to meet Zuko Tisani, who is the CEO of Legacy, and we're going to be finding out how Legacy is giving new wings for emerging businesses. It's going to be a great show. Remember that if you want the Young Money team to come to you, all you need to do is just follow me on Twitter and let me know. It's @TheRealNozi and @CNBC Africa. Don't forget the hashtag. It's Young Money 410. For now, let's meet Vumile. Vumile, it's such a lovely pleasure to meet you. You're such a busy woman. It's been so difficult for us to finally get an opportunity to talk. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's been a mission, hasn't it?
It has been a mission. Now, Vumile, tell us a little bit about Hesed. You have a number of different focus areas or pillars in the business. Walk us through each of those pillars and what each pillar does.
So Hesed Consulting, we started in 2012, and our two main pillars are personal coaching, which we really focus on women who are still in that medium to junior manager space, trying to get into that executive level. So we work in coaching them and getting their mind right and giving them some practical skill sets. The second is obviously consulting with small to medium-sized enterprises, where we help them create capacity, business optimization, and the best customer-centric experience.
Right. Well, let's talk about a little bit about the first pillar, which is really the focus on women, and in particular using coaching as a mechanism to sort of move into a different tier of leadership or management. One might assume that that's quite a saturated space right now. What does the market look like? What does the competitive landscape look like?
I think we've done very well in the South African space to focus on life coaching, which is quite critical.
Yeah.
I think we've got a lot of focus on executive coaching for executives, but that in the middle market really isn't as saturated as you'd like to think. So we expect people to get to executive level and know what to do, but there's no one sort of helping them, guide them to that point, which is where our niche is.
That's really fantastic as well, but surely there must also be some nuances. And I'm going to go straight into the heart of it and talk about black women in particular, because we know they come with socio-economic and sometimes even cultural baggage that they bring into these executive positions. Is the experience of coaching with racial insight harder or easier to do?
Because I'm a black woman and I've come from a corporate perspective, I think it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
You know, and because I've been there, it's a lot easier for me to help guide and coach.
Quick translation, indlela ibuzwa kwabaphambili, which means that you have to ask the ones who are ahead of you what the journey has been like. So it's like the power of hindsight.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. So because I've been a junior manager and worked my way up to executive in various multi-conglomerates across the world, it's easier for me to look back and say, actually, this was a bit challenging being a black woman.
Yeah.
Coming from a space where we have black tax, where we are pioneering in an industry where no one else has really done it prior to us.
Yeah.
So having that hindsight is what I bring to my coaching, which I think helps us connect in a lot more of an authentic manner.
I think that's fantastic, and in a moment I do want to talk about how did you make that decision to leave the comfort of big conglomerates and to take an entrepreneurial journey, which is for sure scarier and lonelier. But before we go there, let's go to the second pillar of the business, where you are focusing on small and medium-sized enterprises. Again, give us a sense of what the market looks like and the nature of the competition.
So in my space, I work a lot with startups. I think that's where my passion is, having also started up myself. So I focus there and I work a lot with in the township economy. So people still think, oh, Vumi, I'm thinking about doing this, I'm thinking about doing that. How do I set it up? Am I even in the right sort of a vehicle for my business? And that's where my passion lies. And I really, really enjoy that. And I found that there's lots of money thrown in that direction from perhaps a seed funding perspective, but no one really helping people set up operations. No one thinking about, we see what you're wanting to do in the big idea, but what is your customer experience like? That really doesn't happen until they're at medium size.
So it really sounds like there's almost a need to really be clear about how much are we getting out of every rand that is being invested in the township economy. It's a priority, but are we translating every rand as efficiently as possible? You're really close to the ground then in the township economy. What do township entrepreneurs need that is different from entrepreneurs in any other parts of the country?
Pretty much access. I
Yeah.
think the biggest challenge has been access. If you're sitting in Sandton and starting up a business, you can walk to any of the financial institutions and someone would be willing to lend you an ear. That's not the case. When you're sitting in Mlazi or Wamashu, you can't walk up to one of the 4 major banks and actually get financing immediately and know what's required. We need to be able to take those urban access to information, urban access to funding, urban access to people who have experience into the townships. That's what's missing.
And what's the competitive advantage to staying in the township? And I suspect I'm asking you this because I think the traditional narrative has always been successful businesses are in the urban centers, they're in the heart of Sandton. And I'm getting a sense that there might actually be a new competitive advantage about staying in the township and being closer to the market segment that you are actually servicing. Are those insights and that narrative coming through?
I don't think as much as it could. There's millions and millions and hundreds of millions of rands in the township that should be circulating in the township and actually empowering people on the ground. With us taking our money, leaving the township and bringing it into the urban areas isn't serving anybody. So I think by redefining the narrative, we really can tap into our own potential and grow our own economies locally. And also the capacity to grow is fundamentally higher in township economies than it is in urbanized areas. When you have the big buildings, when you have all the infrastructure, where are you going to grow? The growth tends to be very, very small in its increments, whilst in townships, there's so much opportunities for that.
So absolutely exponential growth, definitely there. And maybe just a final one while we're still in the township, one would also see the trend of big retailers, for example, coming into the township space. And there's an argument that says they're beginning to crowd out the competition because they make it even smaller, even harder, for the smaller entrepreneurs to actually begin to operate in those spaces. What is the impact of the bigger players coming into the township and looking for the very opportunities that you're talking about?
I think competition is always a good thing. I think what we need to do is think smarter as small entrepreneurs. What big retailers have is bulk buying power. So if small entrepreneurs were to collaborate, to compete, it changes the narrative. We have to start looking at our competitors as our collaborators, especially in the smaller economies.
So let's take a step back from the business and let's get closer to Vumile. I want to start back at that scary, assumed scary decision-making point. I know that you were at a very senior level at Vodafone, working at a continental level. What on earth got into you? Why would you leave a number of really great corporate opportunities and choose to go and focus on entrepreneurship, and in particular in the areas that are quite difficult to crack?
I think I've always been an entrepreneur at heart. I started my first proper business, I suppose, in property when I was 22. The time would always come. I'm a typical millennial. There's only so much time I can give to corporate. I came to learn, and I think I acquired the skill sets I believed I needed and was ready to hit the ground running and to build my own legacy. That's why I went into entrepreneurship. Money's an important thing. We all like nice things. We like handbags and shoes. But I think it was more to be able to leave a legacy and also make an impact in the areas from which I come from.
What would you say was the most useful lesson that you picked up into the corporate space that you think still serves you today as an entrepreneur?
Preparation.
Yeah?
Preparation. When I was in corporate, it was a case of making sure before every engagement I'm well read. I think about every possible angle, and that's what you need in entrepreneurship. You need to be able to really observe what's happening around you, see the opportunity and prepare for it, and to really be able to network and make those connections in order to achieve a certain objective. And I think corporate, that gave me a good skill set.
And of course, we know with preparation can only go so far because the environment or the business environment is always volatile, it's always changing, there are always new variables coming into the space. So if you were to think back now on your entrepreneurial journey from the beginning while you were still sort of straddling both worlds, what would you say was the most humbling experience, if any?
That things don't go according to plan a lot of the time from a timing perspective. I think in corporate you can make a decision and you can implement it fairly quickly. When you're an entrepreneur, you're very reliant on everybody else around you and you're not necessarily a priority. So learning that patience and teaching my money to have that patience whilst investing in my business was a massive lesson for me.
I think that's a fantastic insight. I mean, learning to have personal patience, but also for your investments and your money to have patience. I think I haven't heard that one in a while. And so we've covered what maybe might have been a difficult or humbling moment. Let's talk about what excites you most. Going forward, Hesed Consulting, what can you expect? Are there growth plans in the pipeline? Are there geographic expansions that we can expect? What's on your mind?
So we're very, very excited. We are now starting to expand a little bit more into some more collaborative work in the rest of the continent. We've got some exciting plans happening in Ghana and Kenya. We're off to New York next month, doing some speaking and partnering with a few other businesses that side. So the dream is to keep Hesed Pan-African and really bringing what every entrepreneur wants, dollars and euros and pounds into the continent.
So I love the fact that your playing field is Pan-African, it's continental, and with the intentions of going global, and we're seeing you already tapping into other markets. If there was an insight or a lesson that you could give to other entrepreneurs around how do you break into new markets, how do you build partnerships that go beyond your own markets, what could you share with them that's based on what you've gone through?
I think for me it would be to use what's in your hand. I personally have made great use of LinkedIn. I found fantastic networks leveraging that and just being persistent in seeking those people out and then making sure when they're in the country we connect and following up on those relationships. So what's in your hand? Nothing is impossible now. We all have access to all the same sort of information. If you've got a smartphone, leverage it as much as you can.
Any specific insights for women that are watching the show? I think there's always a conversation around, there are entrepreneurial journeys, but women, the slope is a little bit steeper, the experience is a little bit harder. I don't know if you distinguish yourself in that way, or you just see yourself as an entrepreneur who's doing the best that they can from where they are. What would you say to women?
I'm a proud feminist, unapologetically so. I think that it's a lot more challenging when you are a woman. I think, especially in the African context, we live in a very patriarchal society. So for me, and what I found is reaching out to other women, they tend to be very, very welcoming and opening, which is not what we kind of been taught to expect. I found mentors in great female entrepreneurs who encourage me all the time. And I think I'd say the same to women as entrepreneurs. We always say when you open the door, make sure the door behind you is open for those to come in after you.
Well, there you have it. The door behind you needs to be open so that others may come in after you. And as you can see, she is a fiery ball of energy, but certainly also a really trailblazing entrepreneur to keep your eyes on in Africa and certainly on the global stage as well. That is Vumile Msweli. She is the CEO of Hesed Consulting. Welcome back to Young Money. If you've just joined us, we wrapped up our conversation with Vumile Msweli and we're going straight into our conversation with Zuko Tisani. Now, he is the founder and CEO of Legacy. And beyond just having to wrap my tongue around the name, let's get a sense, Zuko, of what is Legacy and what does Legacy do?
Cool. So Legacy is a startup broker. What we do is we do fundraising for startups. We found that there's a huge issue around early stage investments for technology companies, and we find that there's greater resources in other areas which we've been able to leverage. These areas I'm speaking about are in different ecosystems, as well as also finding our personal board of investors to invest into these startups. You know, we hear about IDC and other funders, but it's always, locked up somewhere. So we found our greatest success is being able to support the entrepreneur that's trying to do it for themselves.
I mean, that story sounds absolutely phenomenal, because if I'm a young entrepreneur or have a startup and I'm struggling to access capital and funding opportunities, so you're saying that I come to you, what's the process like? Do you then sort of do a due diligence on the business, and how do you make sure that you're sort of matching me up with a potentially lucrative or just positive investor or investment community?
Sure. So I think the way we go about it is really we look at startups that are already commercialized. So we understand that early stage funding is an issue, but we don't do too early. So if you're in the market for the past 6 months and you're able to prove a track record and also show a forecast in terms of what your business will be like in the next year, it becomes an easier conversation. And it's not really about matchmaking with an investor that cares about cost too, but also demonstrating what's the value of the investment.
Right.
So I think when people talk about technology, they always make the mistake by saying, sure, it's such a taboo space and we don't really want to engage with that. But an investment is an investment at the end of the day. If a company is able to prove their numbers and also prove their profitability, it's the same thing as buying into a Burger King. Long story
but
short.
I'm sure you've got to manage expectations, because if we think about technology startups, some of the big tech startups that became tech giants come to mind. Are investors realistic? about the kind of return that they could be receiving out of tech startup investments in South Africa?
You know, a lot of the cases are, you know, a startup has exponential potential to obviously make a great ROI. But a lot of the times, you know, it's also focused on what? Early adoption. It's also focused on what the market is also able to adapt to in terms of is the technology ready enough, or are we at a level prepared for this new, you know, new age cutting to bring forth. So those are the kind of questions we ask in terms of what's the market size looking like, what's our technology readiness like at the moment for this company to come in. And normally when those validations are done, we're able to create a reasonable expectation to say, you know what, we forecast by the trend of what we're seeing and the adoption of South Africa of this technology, we see this company, you know, in the next 5 years doing great things.
And I'm sure you're managing expectations on both sides, right? So on the one hand, there's the investor and the investment community, but there's also the entrepreneurs who might have some misconceptions about what it means to be a startup, to be a tech startup in particular, and what it means to have find a partner like Legacy that's going to help them tap into funding opportunities. What do you think is the biggest mistake tech startup entrepreneurs are potentially making that you have to correct as you get them onto the path?
I think the biggest mistake is also realizing that money's not going to come out anytime soon. So I think the expectation is, again, goes back to the finances. You know, I think it's really important for a startup to understand bootstrapping, to understand what money needs to be retained for a foreseeable amount of time. You know, we've got 80% of startups actually failing within the first 18 months of operation. And it kind of shows you a demonstration of there's an unrealistic expectation around what their finances need to be in terms of to plan going forward, and as well as, you know, remaining sustainable. So sustainability for me is really the tricky part. I mean, we all want nice Lamborghinis, but the frugality of what it means to have money but not be profitable is really the confusion. So I think that's where the kissing cousins go wrong. You think because you've got this money in your accounts, you're profitable. So scalability as well as that understanding of your finances are the biggest misconceptions.
I'm really interested in the journey that you've been on. And before Legacy, management consulting in one of the bigger managing consulting firms. What triggers this idea that actually I can make a difference as the jockey of my own horse and in my own race, rather than being part of a bigger organization?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just the curse of being, you know, young, dumb and broke. You know, we just decided to take an opportunity where we saw a lot of growth and gap, right? So what happened was, you know, I'm on this project at one of the banks here as a project manager, and I get an opportunity to go over to a conference in Hong Kong. We go over there and we talk about bringing something like this to South Africa, where we see the resources available there around, you know, funders, around what the startup community is like. And we're thinking about how do we now leverage these resources, this international community, and bring it over to South Africa and really close these gaps around funding, incubation, skills trade, knowledge trade, as well as just basically getting that exposure. You know, this is the dark continent, so to speak, that we've been hearing about. So we went over, we tried to bring over the conference to South Africa. It was going to cost about $1 million. We went over there with a letter of intent from Telkom. And I think there was just a miscommunication around securing the numbers. You know, they wanted huge numbers to come in, and people don't believe that an African market can take in an international community of that size. So we're still yet to prove that. You know, it's also a part of our business model in terms of the conferencing. So last year we pivoted. We decided if we can't bring over the world to South Africa, we're going to bring Africa to the world. So we took over 20 startup entrepreneurs over to Lisbon last November, mainly backed by Standard Bank, you know, and the experience there was great. They got great wins. A few of them have been incubated in Silicon Valley. One has been incubated at Startup Lisboa. Some received, Jonga received 200,000 in investments in terms of funding, and a lot of them got opportunities to obviously speak to business leaders about how do they integrate and get a global footprint as a South African startup in that space.
So there again, almost a story of sort of out of the setback, choosing to pivot and choosing to see the opportunity. Are you going to stay? I mean, I want to get a sense of the future and the pipeline. Is the intent to say, okay, well, maybe this model that we stumbled upon is actually the thing we should be doing, or is the view that we use this as a stepping stone to get somewhere else?
It is a stepping stone, but again, it goes back to, I think, perseverance or delusion. So do we persevere not knowing if someone's going to buy a huge conference and bring it over to South Africa because we need the partners for that? Or do we continue with the successful model in terms of being able to do excursions for especially women in technology? That's our huge focus in 2018. How do we get that exposure for them, as well as young entrepreneurs, as well as executives in the digital space? So we are continuing on, Standbank are going to be our repeat customers this year. We've got 4 conferences lined up. And I think we focused on that as well as continuing with the brokering. So let's continue, but at the same time, we're allowed to dream, and we're going to obviously carry on driving, bringing in a huge international community to our land soon. Yeah.
Sure, it sounds so exciting, and literally if I was a woman in tech and I had a tech startup, this is the conversation I want to be plugged into. But let's talk about some of the things maybe you've learned in hindsight on the journey. If you could undo any decision or any action that you have taken in this journey thus far, is there anything that you think, this one, I should have done it differently?
There's a lot that I could have done better, especially when it comes to contracting and speaking on your legal sides. I think there's many lessons for me to learn around how do you ensure that you always get your money, because there's situations where you can work and, there can be ways that you don't get rewarded for it. Legal, definitely, but I don't always hold it as a regret. So I don't have any regrets in terms of what I would do differently. I really think putting yourself in the front line is really a part of what entrepreneurship's about. So, I really appreciate that about, me standing out there and saying, I'm exposed in the space and whatever may happen, in terms of following this dream, let it be kind of thing. So I've taken that opportunity, but at the same time, I also want to say in the same breath that, we as Black entrepreneurs don't come from, these trust funds and things to sustain us whilst we are on our grind. So as much as I do put myself in that front line, I obviously do think, bread and butter is most important. So if you're able to also have a job on the side, but from 7 to 2 a.m., you're driving a hustle, that really is an encouragement I'd like to get
that's absolutely phenomenal, because I almost get the sense that even the concept of hustling is almost getting bogged down in sort of a negative narrative, because people aren't always understanding or seeing that it can be done in a way that makes sense, that covers the bread and butter issues, but that is sustainable and that can actually, translate into something bigger. I want to go back to Zuko again. Personal drivers and motivations, the thing that when you're having a bad day, and this happens, it's the world of business, it's the world of entrepreneurship, it's the world of trying to work with client needs and demands. What's that thing that just sort of helps you get up, dust yourself off, and just keep going?
I've been quite privileged to see a lot of things, doing conferences over 4 continents. I'm able to see wow, there is this world that exists. And for me, being the gateway in terms of the communities between, or ecosystem bridge rather, between South Africa and the world and both ways back, that for me is such a drive to say that, I could be, you're pioneering something, so it's all about the vision at the end of the day. So for me, that's really a drive to remain true to that vision and just kind of hold on to it. So from what I've seen, and obviously what I really hope to bring to Africa, and obviously expose Africa to, it's really a drive of mine to see it through.
I think, one of the ideas that is surfacing from what you're saying is really this idea of exposure. And, a lot of the time, people that look like you and me come from communities where exposure isn't always a given, and you're almost saying that part of your competitive advantage, part of your superpower is that you've been able to be globally exposed and been able to transverse across continents. How do you get it right for the Zukos and the Noziphos who aren't on the global stage? How do we bring the world to them?
To bring the world to them, I think it's always been a key conversation point, especially when I'm speaking about bringing the world to Africa. What do I want them to see? Do I want them to see that these guys that already, have made it and have already made, the millions and easy investments? Or do I want to obviously bring them to the community that really need the investment? So really trying to think about that marriage. How do you take a community which actually is in desperate need of investment and bring them to the front lines? Because normally they're not the, business investments that that these guys want. So trying to find that balance where we can actually say, you know, this is Africa, we're going to have a merge of this thing. So in our conference that we're hoping to bring to South Africa, there's obviously going to be a lot of exposure for entrepreneurs, local entrepreneurs that don't have the benefits of, you know, paying a 850 euro tickets to attend or to expose themselves to. And yeah, a lot of it has to come down to a social benefit cause. I mean, that's really the point of what we're doing, is giving the exposure to the entrepreneur at the end of the day who needs to leverage off these resources. So yes.
And there you have it, right at the core. The currency that is being traded here is exposure and access and opportunity to entrepreneurs. It's a big thank you to the founder of Legacy, that is Zuko. Tisani, thank you very much for your time. What an awesome conversation. And of course, if you want the Young Money team to come to you, all you need to do, and I have been saying this, is follow me on Twitter. It's @TheRealNozi or @CNBC Africa. Send me a young DM. Let me know what your business is up to, and we would love to come to you and give you an opportunity to take your business to the world. From myself and the team, it's goodbye.